Alright, back to working with Unity. So I want to be able to put the solar panels individually, put that texture on. And I notice I can't do it, doesn't seem like I can do it all at once. When I shift click, nothing happens. If I click, I get the whole thing or a single thing. Well, yeah, now it looks like I can shift click. It all depends, doesn't it? So I'm going to try that and try to put the solar panels on and see what happens. Let's try just those and then drag this. Nope, just does one at a time. So, gotta do one at a time, you gotta do one at a time. Put the solar panels on by dragging that texture. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a global thing that could be done? Apparently not. These are monocrystalline that came with the SketchUp model. And I guess we'll do the same thing over here. It begs the question of whether one has to actually, no, you don't have to highlight it at all, looks like. So you just drag them on. And drag them on. These were the textures that came with the model. And I don't want to try anything else because I've tried, it's hard to remove them once you put them on, so I'm still not sure how Unity associates files. So I'm just going to be conservative. And there, it goes on there. Alright, as my alright. Now it does appear that the sun, wherever the sun may be, is in the wrong direction because it's obviously casting shadows to the south and it shouldn't. And I wonder then if this whole thing doesn't need to be turned around so that if we were to take everything and rotate it, then where would we rotate it? We could rotate everything around that way. What did I do? Did I make any change? Let me hit Control Z, undo. So let me see here. If I look around there, and now if I want to rotate everything in the other direction, I would, it seems like you could do a rotation along the y-axis of 180 degrees. That got messed up. Y0 went, X went to 0. There we go. There's 180 degrees. So let's see if that did a better job, except our solar pavilion actually disappeared. Or no, it just got really rotated strangely. And we didn't want that to happen. So we're going to go back on that. So yeah, how do you rotate everything? So this way I can rotate it. Oops. And if I click off of that now, the shadow's still in the same location, so what good did that do? Oops. I need to redo section change. And what is that little thing up here? By golly. That says wind turbine, so there's something associated with the wind turbine. That, there's a wind turbine there. Oh, it's a platform? No. Got nothing to do with the wind turbine, but it does seem to have something to do with the wind turbine. So if I click off of it and just click that, it's definitely associated, whatever it is, whatever part that is. It's not one of these IDs, but it's associated with the wind turbine. How bizarre. So there's little artifact things that can really make your day wonderful. Don't seem to be able to click just that because of its association component. Alright, stranger than fiction. Anyway, as for the shadow, we see the shadow there. If I did a rotation on the entire environment and everything in there, that and the solar pavilion, and I rotated them around that away, and then look at where the shadow falls, it still falls in the same direction. So that was completely unnecessary. Maybe it's a baked-in shadow. That could be. So undo rotate. But it is highly bizarre. Why would it have a baked-in shadow? It means it has a baked-in light. And the solar pavilion, maybe it's the camera that comes in here. So maybe I should get rid of this camera and break the instance and get rid of this camera and this camera and this camera and this camera and delete those instances. Doesn't do anything to the shadow apparently. This camera here is now gone, but it has nothing to do with that shadow. The only other thing I can think to do is to see where the sun is. There's the sun, and obviously the sun is in a weird place in the sky, so we'll have to see if we can work with that. We note that the sun is in the sky, up there, and if we turn off the sun, then as you can see there's no shadows at all. When we turn on the sun, there's the shadow, but somehow the sun is in a strange part of the sky. So what is it about it? The scene lighting is used when toggling off a light attached to the scene view camera. Let's say, so this is scene lighting, and when this is turned off, we'd have to put in a light attached to the camera. So maybe what that means is, when we look in the environment here, there is a directional light, and that directional light is apparently here. And if I take the directional light and I move it and move it up, we see it's rotated in the wrong direction. So I'm going to rotate the directional light that way. Now when I turn on the sun, okay. So my directional light is the one that was causing these weird shadows. So I'm going to use this light to play the sun, but I'm also going to move it. I'm going to move it out and up as the sun may be. And when I zoom in, the shadow is now falling in the right place. So that's good. So we have our shadows. Alright, so there's the scene lighting for that. That little thing is casting a shadow here. And I don't know what that is. What is that artifact? How do I break that instance? Alright, I've figured out what that thing is. That is the SketchUp instance here. And I think I want to get rid of it. So I'm going to, it doesn't even let me delete it. So what can I do with that? Can't do anything with it. It's really awful. It's sort of baked into it. I don't know, maybe when I select the wind turbine alone, maybe I can do a Shift D and duplicate it. And there's my duplicated one, maybe? Well, it wasn't Shift D, was it? It's supposed to be Control D? Let's see, yeah, there we go. So I've created another windmill, And that means that I should be able to take this. Ooh, no. So if I delete it, it really, that is controlling the whole thing. And there's no way to delete that. It's definitely a part of it. Whatever it is, 48 vertices. And you can't bring it in without it. So it appears. Select dependencies, rig model, sketch out transform. That doesn't help. So, yeah. So it doesn't seem like I can do much with it. Undo selection change, undo selection change, and undo selection change. Just keep backing out until Control Z, until we get our window back. And put it back in its place. But yeah, what to do about that thing? Okay, here's something weird. So if I click Mesh Render, that little square appears, and if I get rid of Mesh Render, it disappears. So whatever it is, lighting, materials, maybe the wind turbine doesn't need a mesh render. I'm going to see what happens if I remove this component. Ah, good. It's gone for whatever it was. So, there we are. Something new you learn every day when you're playing around here. Alrighty. Got a pavilion there. Let's see. Somewhere in the blend, we have we had a rosebud. We'll open up Blender. Some in the blend we had a bit of a lake. I'm going to try to work on some texturing. Let's see if I can. So the lake part should be open in Objects. Are we in? Let's go to Layout. Click just on the lake. And let's export that lake. And go to File and go to Export as an object. And make sure it says Selection Only. And Material Groups as well. We might as well. We'll call this Lake. And export that object. And go back in here. And boom, it appears. And we have to again place it. So let's go here. And take the lake and drop it in. Came in way too high as usual. But we can drop it down here in Y. And then we can zoom up over like this. Hit F to get close. And bring it down. Go to the other side. Zoom in. And we have a bit of a lake here. All right. Now, of course, I can add a material to this. And if I have a little folder in the Blender called Materials, and I create a material for this, I would do it in create material. There it is. So I could call this lake, and then I can take this lake and drop it on. But now I can change the color and make it bluish or bluish dark blue. That's what I want to do. So there's the material for the lake. So that's, but that's not really a texture, so to speak. And actually, of course, it looks better to have the real lake in there. But that would be how you could work on that. In terms of trees, there should be a tree generator in this, but you have to get that package. So you go to the asset store, and you say trees, and people will charge you all sorts of money for trees, but then there's realistic tree for free, and these weird artistic trees for free. And so you probably want to filter this by sort by price, low to high, free being the cheapest, tree randomizer, flying tree, a cherry tree, mountain terrain, mobile tree package. It's got 5 stars, stylized tree pack, low poly trees, realistic trees, 10 different types, coconut palms. So there's different packages, and perhaps we can try the mobile tree package. And it says 3 low poly trees, terrain trees, ambient occlusion inside the mobile folder. They're not bad. Should certainly work for us. So let's see what happens with these trees. We've downloaded it, we import it. Trees come in, you import them into Unity. And if we picked the right tree, then when we now go to our assets, there's the tree package down here, and the models are here, and I guess we can try, oh, okay, so it comes in weird, didn't it? We ain't gonna do that. Materials are all there. What's the best way to place a tree? The best way to place a tree may be just to go like this. Let's see if this works. Yeah, we could do that. Comes in right, bring it down to the ground. Now go to your Y view and bring it over and start placing your trees. So you'd plant the tree and then come up to the top view and then grow your tree. Although that might get really weird and really big looking. So you always have to see what growing the tree like that does, since the trees are not necessarily comes up like that. So yeah, that tree is going to be so super huge, it's not even funny. No tree is that big. So let's go undo move and undo scale. So that's just going to be a little tree. So as you're planting your trees, you'll have to find trees that can be scaled properly. Like this one here, if I place it here on the ground, I'm going to have to come up here, move it over the next tree. So this is the painstaking process of vegetating your property. Plant the tree, and look down to make sure that it's where you want it to be. And let's try that other tree, this one here. Once again, if you select it and you put it down on the ground, then you'd have to move it about. So this lets you come in here and plant trees. I thought I had 3 in there. Maybe not. What did I do with that other one? This one here. So little by little you can start to grow your forest. Although it seemed to be absurdly big trees. I know. There are other packages, of course, as we saw. And so if you go into tree, let's see what this one's like. People seem to like this one, high quality tree pack. And so you can try this one. So again, import it. Put this tree into here. That package gets added. And Unity is all about adding packages that you can use in your scene. So now that tree package is somewhere in here. In prefab, sample scenes, assets. There it is, tree 9. Open that up, and then you can try to bring these trees in, like that one there. For example, a weird tree if I ever saw one. And that one's huge. So that's where you're going to have to come in. You're going to have to scale those trees down to make them more realistic. And then move them to where you want to put your tree. Right. So you can build your environment with these different trees, although they come in upside down, it looks like. And there are lots to play with. Lots and lots to play with. Alrighty. And I like mesh. Now there is a way to add terrain to the Unity model, and the way that you do that is to go to Game Object and 3D Object Terrain, and then a terrain generator will come up, and when you click on that, it looks like it says no tool selected. So you select the tool, raise or lower the terrain, paint height, paint texture. So if you want to paint a texture, of course you have to work on the terrain, and there's the terrain that is generated. Now, given where the terrain came in, it looks like my entire model is too low. I'm going to keep it that way just for now because I want to show how you use the terrain generator. But if I wanted to do grass, for example, I might start with a brush like this, and with this brush I would have to pick a texture to paint with. Select a texture below and then paint. Now I don't have any terrain texture identified, so you would edit textures and add a texture, and you need to select a texture. Now, do I have any textures? Well, I have some textures here from the trees I just brought in, but those aren't going to really work out well for me there. The normal and the smoothness. So I need to get a tiling texture for this. So once again, because I don't have any textures there, I go to the asset store and I typed in terrain, price low to high, and here's one called terrain textures that may work for me. It's got some grass and some stones, and it's free. So I'm going to download that. So I already purchased this, isn't that interesting? A long time ago, back in 2020, February 2nd. Well, that's today. I purchased this item. Good for me. So it must be in here somewhere. Standard assets, prefabs, and I don't see any, unless it's in 2D. Prefabs, no, physical materials, no, nothing there. So where is this? I wonder. Oh, it's downloading still. That's what it is. Gotta wait. So just note before we get started with this that when you generate a terrain like you have here, you have tools to raise or lower the terrain, and you can pick a way to do it, and it'll make mountains, for example. Or you can pick a harder brush. You can smooth the height, so you can paint a height, and then you can come in and you can smooth it, so you can make your mountains. And that's how you can generate these various terrains depending on the brush size and the opacity. So you can make an atoll if you like that, and then so you can play with that, and you can make them go down also. You can make it an indentation in the ground by hitting the control, the Alt key. Must be the Alt, or is it? No, there you go. The Control key, because oh, wait a minute. So I'm not sure whether that switched it. It's still making it bigger. And you can change the brush size, and you can flatten. So you have that height maker, and then you can make a little smaller heights. And I thought that when I that, or flatten it all out. And once you've got your, still stuck there, isn't it? So what you would do if you're trying to paint a texture is you would use your paintbrush there and then pick the kind of texture brush that you want, and then edit texture, add texture, and then select for smoothness whatever textures you have. Somewhere down here it seems I have grass, and so that selects for that. Should have. Where did it go? There it is. And then for the normal texture, you find a normal map, which is like a bump map. And there are these blue things that suggest 3D. So there's glass, stained grass front. So for your normal map, you can use something like that. It gives it some texture. And for that one, looks like the only thing I have, because I don't have a specific one, maybe I'll just use, well, that's for stained glass. That's a normal map, or cliff normals. Usually, the texture should come with a normal map, and this grass one doesn't. So it may get some weird effects if we use a different one for that, but let's use Mud Rocky and just see what that happens with that. And then, yeah, so then you have this. And when you go then to change the look of it, you get this weird terrain here. Undo height map, undo height map, undo height map, so we can keep undoing that. The only reason I'm hesitant to use a texture that tree got put over there for some reason, is that it will wipe out whatever's under here. So if I take my environment and all of my materials here and I move them up, oh, it moves the terrain up with it. Ain't that interesting too? Oh, it's because I selected the terrain. All right. And I just move the terrain down. Yes, I can. So usually a terrain is something that you create for not having to use a photograph like this. And that's when you create the terrain and make it a match here. But the hard thing is going to be to decide when to use a terrain and when to use a not terrain for this. So terrain does give you the ability to paint with different textures and make different heights. You can make a little desert region over here. You can edit textures. You can add a texture. Again, select what texture you want to use. Like if you want.
What is this?
What?
The color stuff.
That's the normal map for the bumpiness of it.
Up.
Yeah.
This.
It's the bump maps. So here's broadleaf, for example. I could take broadleaf, and then for its 2D texture, I could find the broadleaf bump map like that, and then I'd add those. And then when I paint with the broadleaf, you see it has a certain look to it. So I'm painting with the broadleaf map. And I can change the size of my brush.
You go down, it gets smaller.
Well, if you use a smaller brush, yeah. So you have the ability to paint with these different textures, see? And you can paint in different ways, like you can scatter it with this. You can also then smooth the height of that mountain down. So you're creating a landscape to walk around. Thing is, it doesn't really work. You make a world that way, but it doesn't work with pictures like the one I'm using. Unless...
What do you mean? Yeah.
Well, there's a picture of Rosebud, so the picture of Rosebud is not going to easily go on the terrain. If
Why?
I were to... Because it's tiling, it's about the tile size. So if I were to add a... Let's say I wanted to paint with the Rosebud picture. I go to Edit Textures, add a texture.
Why you need a terrain if you already have a Google map and it has its own thing?
It doesn't have its own terrain. It doesn't have any contours to it. But you can add grass and stuff.
How can you apply it to the terrain?
You can't. I don't know any way yet.
How are you going to use that then?
I'm not sure. I'm just figuring it all out. I could put particle fire
On?
if I want to paint with fire. Paint with fire.
But that's for the terrain.
Yeah, it doesn't paint on Rosebud. It only paints on terrain.
Yeah. How you make Rosebud a terrain?
I can't. I'd have to make the whole thing in the terrain.
What do you mean?
Well,
is there a terrain software?
Maybe if I went to Edit Textures and I went to Add Texture, if I could find in my assets, maybe I could find none. I'd have to find where the Rosebud asset was. And maybe I have it. There it is, Rosebud. All right. So there's no bump map for it. If I add Rosebud and I paint with that terrain, see, I can paint, but look at what's happening. It's making mini rosebuds everywhere. Right? You see that? There's the lake.
Right.
I'm painting with the map of Rosebud. There's like mini rosebuds everywhere. So what you would have to do if you wanted to paint that as a terrain is you'd have to edit that texture and make the size of the X whatever this whole thing is.
But you were having it, and
Well,
it
maybe,
was
let me see.
mini.
Let me see. So let me see if I can find.
So the unit is the size of the actual rosebud of the terrain.
You'd have to do that, right? You'd have to be like, maybe maybe I can find it. Hold on. Let me see if I click on this. How do I learn the extent? So what I'm going to try to do to measure rosebud is I'm going to find this corner using this tree. So there's that tree, and I'm going to place the tree at the corner. And I'm going to note that the corner is at negative 256x. And then if I go over to the other side of the snippet I have, well, that's in Z, all right? So it's negative 183, and it moves up to 194. So 195 is 0. 195 plus 180, let's say 185. 185 plus 195 is 185 plus 195. You think I'd be able to do this math? 200 plus 95 plus 85. It's 300 plus 80, so 380 over there. So 380 in Z. And let me move this back again to here. So 380 in Z. And then 380 in Z. And then we have X at negative 257. I have to write this down. 380Z, and then here for the X, we're starting at, it looks like 257. Okay. 257.
Here, look at this one. And he says, finally someone understands the reality.
And then move this over to here. And that is 272. So we're looking at 529 in X. All right, so that means that when we go to edit in our terrain, and we look at the paint, and we edit this texture, if the size of this in X was 529, and the size of this in Y was, wait a minute, there shouldn't be a Y, should there? Thought Y was up and down. Well, let's just try this as 380. And then we were to paint with it. That is to say, if we took the terrain and moved the terrain, this is highly experimental, move the terrain underneath here, and if we could affect the scale of the terrain in such a way, if we were to scale it so that it so the terrain does not like to be scaled. I guess that's the biggest terrain you can get. But let's move the terrain up. And then let's look down on the terrain. And it appears as though we would then be able to take our paintbrush and paint the terrain. If I made it a very big brush, like the biggest brush I can find with the biggest opacity. There we go. So it's painting Rosebud onto the terrain. As you can see, until we get to that upper part. So that's kind of interesting, and then the rest would be sort of duplicate of Rosebud, which we wouldn't really need. But if that was the case, then we could take the terrain and drop it down. Just have to go into the side view. And then that Rosebud would have to map, although it's really kind of backwards, isn't it? Let's see. Isn't it funny that it painted it backwards? All right. Well, that's interesting, and that just means that the paintbrush here was painted backwards. So we'd have to make it, what does that mean, 529 here, and 380 there. Nope, that didn't do it either. It's still backwards. So we're better off with 529 and 380. But it would have to be turned around. I don't know what the offset does. Let's see if we have 50 as an offset. Doesn't do much. Hit apply. That's in there. And I don't know if making it negative does anything, but we can try. It did. Don't know which one should be negative though. Apparently that's the one. I think if you make this negative, that flips it. Oh, that actually worked. Alrighty, apply. So now we have this brush, and we have a Rosebud terrain that is the same size, because we're using the picture to paint it. And the nice advantage of that is that I can now, you will see, as they kind of match pretty well. Put that right underneath it, see that? Put that one right underneath it. See how that matches up there. We can now take our Rosebud plane and we can hide it, so we don't even see it anymore. And with that, you'll see that the buildings now are in the wrong place, but that's okay because I can take the terrain and move it up to the buildings. And now I definitely don't need the lake anymore. So I can take my lake and I can hide that. And of course there are no mountains at Rosebud. So now that I'm working with a terrain instead, I can go into my terrain editor and I can come here and flatten the whole thing. And what the advantage of this is in using terrain is that now I can paint over my picture. Although it does look like something got a bit messed up. Yeah, it did get a bit messed up, didn't it? Yeah. So what I'll have to do here is go back and edit my terrain again and play with the numbers. Maybe it's got to be offset by, let's see what 10 does. No, I don't want to do that. That part was okay. Maybe I'll try a -5. Okay, so actually I should look at this from the top view. And let's see what happens when I offset this by 5. No, let's see what 10 does. It's a bit better. Let's see what 15 does. That is also better. We can offset this by -10 and see what that does. It's getting better, getting closer. The car isn't exactly on, it's a bit too big. That may mean that I made my size wrong, so maybe I should go -520. No, that was not good. Maybe it should be -30. So you're going to play around with that. And let me see what 390 does. It's a little closer. So my measurements weren't very precise. That was really bad. 375. No, that wasn't good. 380 was better. And but the sizes are a little bit better than they were. And I can almost live with that because I can move the car. If I go back to my car, which was, where did my car go? House, greenhouse, rosebud plane. Car was there somewhere. Ford Escape, there it is. I can move my car over to that part. And the house is not perfect. I can move this again back here and the house, but it's not that bad. The windmill has to go back. Oops, I took not all the windmill, but I do the whole wind turbine and place it. But here's the nice thing about working with the terrain. So if I'm in the game, of course, this gets really pixelated and it should be grass. But now I have the ability to go into my terrain and paint with grass. And now that grass doesn't look great, and that may be because the tiling is, oh, I was using the wrong kind of bump map. So maybe if I get rid of the bump map and select none, that makes the grass look better. It just doesn't have a 3D texture to it. So what bump map does is it gives it a texture. And sometimes those textures can be good and sometimes they can be awful. And I go to grass. I don't think we actually have any grass. Yeah, I do, but I have glass. I don't have grass for a bump map. So since I don't have a bump map for grass, I might as well not use the bump map. But now I'm painting grass in where it really is in the picture, which will make it look much more realistic. And when it comes to the path, if I want to put in a texture that is a texture of concrete, then I can select, and if I have some gravel, I don't think I have any gravel, but if I did, I could put that in as well. Since I don't have any gravel right now, probably the best I can do is replace it with, well, with what? And this is where you have to download from your asset store, and I'm not online to do it. This is where you would download the textures that you want to use. So gravel, let's just do bark for now, and later we'll put gravel over it. And again, we don't have a texture yet for that, but we'll add that. And then if I pick the bark there, then I could come in and really it would be nice if I had a geometric shape for this. Use a much smaller brush. And then you start drawing a path through the woods. that leads up to the garage, as you can see. And you can paint over the street. And since there's a tree in the way, that's just a picture of a tree. I can draw my path like this, and then I can actually come in and put a tree. Now this has a tree generator, which is right here. You can paint trees. You have to find the spot, and you have to have an actual tree. No trees were defined, so when you edit tree and add a tree, you'd have to assign a tree. And if you have a tree prefab, then you could put it in, but there's no tree assigned yet. So come in here and you find a tree. There's a tree. Tree number 9, add it. And now you have a tree that you put in, and you come in and say, hey, plant a tree. And it planted a whole bunch of trees. So that was weird. Why? Because, let me undo that. Undo place a tree because I have a brush size that's too big. That's smaller. I've got a tree density of 83, and really I want a tree density maybe of 10. I put in 1 tree. That was much better. Much better. Random height. And so you start planting trees wherever you can. So let me plant another tree. Brush size, tree density. Let's go up to 13. Try it again. It won't let me. See if I try it again. Click on it. No. Why? Apply. It's not letting me put in more trees. Well, let me put in 1. That was nice. Edit tree. Add tree. Please assign a tree. Add a tree. Come on. Don't freeze on me. Put a tree. Tree, tree, tree. There's a tree. Add it. There's another tree. Come in here and we should be able to double click and add the tree. Brush size. Oh, there we go. I don't know why that worked and the other didn't. Brush size, tree density, 17, 20 trees. Put some trees in, darn it. Yeah. We do have 1 tree in there. And we have another tree. Oh, it is putting trees, just putting trees without leaves. Ain't that something? Brush size, color variation, tree height, tree density. Refresh. Let's try that other tree. Okay. Sometimes it does trees, sometimes it don't. There's one. There ain't no one there. There's a tree. So I guess it kind of works when it works. Start planting trees on the landscape. Sometimes it doesn't work. Make the brush size smaller. Put in a tree. Nothing happened. Yeah, there comes the tree. So yeah, whenever it seems to want to do its work. But you can see then what you're doing here is you're using the ability to plant trees. You can plant multiple trees. This one here is paint details onto the trees. And this here lets you put in these textures like that grass or like these wood chips. So you can start planting wood chips in various areas, like these discolored areas here. So you have much better luck working with a terrain, and that is how you would get a terrain in there. And as for the lake would want to have a texture that would be water, and I don't have a water texture as far as I know. I have no water. No water. Oh, there's water. Is that water? What is that? There's a water there. Water bump. These are bump maps. There's water. All right, so you use the water, and then for the normal map, I will use the water bump map. So now when I add this, texture wrap must be made set to repeat. I don't know what that means. It won't let me do it. Set to repeat, eh? Well, whatever that means, I don't know. But it doesn't want to let me do it. Because I should be able to add that texture. Select the tiling texture. And I guess for some reason the water is not set to repeat. Texture wrap must be set to repeat. So that one's not. So I can't use that for the water. I'll have to download another water texture somewhere because I don't have a good one. Maybe I can try that. No, it still doesn't set to repeat. So can't do that until I learn more about that. So the best I can do is paint with fire. So yeah, there's my lake being painted with fire. That's really weird. But once I get a water texture, I will definitely paint with water. So wait, I've learned something that maybe. I've got these water textures, and these said that they were in clamp mode, so I changed it to repeat. And if I change it to repeat, then maybe when I go to terrain, and I add a texture, and I decide to select a tiling texture now and go to water, and then select its bump map. It's bump map for water. It still says it texture wrap mode must be set to repeat. So what did I do wrong? This here is set to repeat now. And this one here is set to repeat, and this one here is set to repeat, and this one here are set to repeat. So I don't know why it's not working, because I set them to repeat. I set it to repeat, and I set it to repeat. So that didn't work. Alright, so water textures. Some interesting water textures here. They don't have any. Let me see, if I take this water texture and download this and save this image as water texture in my tutorials thing in the Unity projects, in assets, under files, prefabs. Let me make a folder here called textures th and put it in that folder. Go back to Unity and should be able to find now what is the textures th here anywhere. Blender files are there. I'm not finding it. However, it's not here. Maybe I have to create a folder here and call it, this time I'll call it th textures so I don't confuse it with the other. And then in that folder, I can import a new asset, and that asset would be the one that I put in here in assets. Textures th, I'll put that one in here. Now, if I go to my terrain and I add a new texture, then I should be able to find that number 8 water and add it. Now I take that and I paint, yes, now I'm painting with water. And I can make the brush bigger. The problem is the tiling size, as you can see.
It's the picture.
Yeah, that's how you paint with pictures. And the tiling size is really awful, so what happens if we make the tile in size 40? We could do that, or we could make it really, really tiny, like about 2, and make this 2. Then you have this weird lensing as you come into the picture. So that's not a great way to use a tile for that. If we made it 100 or 1,000, then we get that look, which has some merit to it.
Do you color it?
No, I'm just painting with the actual picture. But if I bring it, no, if I bring it down to 100 and bring this down to 100, then you see the tiling is a little bit awkward. But this is the great thing about using a terrain, is that you can put textures in, and then you can play around with the size of the tiling in order to make that texture work better. So that's part of the game. And then over here, of course, we have to put in more grasses. And I have not downloaded all of my grasses yet, but there is an infinite number of different textures out there. Once you get back online, like I can use this grass perhaps, and add that. And then when I go to do this part here, I can come in and, oh, I'm still on that. Oops. Pick this grass, and then, but that grass looks really icky. So you can add another texture. Try to see if you have another appropriate grass. Eventually you'll hit upon all the different grasses that are possible. This one's not too bad. Yeah, it's not too bad. Except it really doesn't belong in that green part of the map. This is a grass that belongs down here where things are overgrazed a bit. Yeah, so now we're beginning to paint with that part of the grass. And that's how you do it. Working with textures so that you begin to color your map. And then I can get rid of the stuff around that tree and around that tree because I've planted a tree there, as you see. And that tree there. So I'll have to put in more trees to cover these. So again, you go to your tree generator and you pick your tree and you put it in, if it'll let you. Mass place trees. Why aren't you planting trees? I'm supposed to go and let's try this one here. No. No tree being planted. Why? Don't give me random tree heights. Give me a tree. Anywhere. Tree, tree, tree. Refresh. And trees aren't working. Well, maybe what I can do here is select my tree here and duplicate it with Control D and place, so I can have a placeholder for my trees. And then Control D and place that tree, and Control D and place that tree, and Control D and place that tree. And so my point in doing this is that you've placed your trees, then you can go into your terrain editor and you can paint that terrain underneath where the trees were. Now you just see is just the shadow of the trees. So this is how you replace that map. And if you ever get lost and you think, well, what was the actual image originally? you go back to the plane that you had, you turn it on, and you move it up and see, well, what was, yeah, okay, that's where the trees were, that's what the terrain looked like. Because you're going to be replacing everything with 3D assets. You see? So you can turn that off and start building up. Save this. Now I'm going to try putting in a multi-purpose camera, pivot camera, handheld camera, CCTV. I'm going to try a free look camera and drop this in the scene and see what that camera sees. Okay, so now I can see what the camera sees, but I can't move it around. Maybe I shouldn't have put that in. Let's see, if I hit play the game, yeah, now I can look around with that camera. The camera doesn't move, but you can see the trees and the shadows now, and how good the terrain looks. Get an idea for it, but all this camera does is move around. It's not a great camera from that perspective. So maybe I don't want that camera in. Let's see where that camera went. That's a free look camera rig. It does do different things, but it doesn't move. So it does have pivot. It pivots the main camera, as you can see, and you can place it where you want to. But that camera isn't going to do what I want it to. Let's try the multi-purpose camera. Let's drop that in and see what that does. It also pivots. There's the main camera, and we can set where we want to place it. Let me move it in front of the solar panels and let me rotate it so that when I get into the world you can see the solar panels and the windmill. Alright, so then when we go to play the game, what does this camera do? It doesn't do anything. It just sits there. Okay, that's not a great camera. Just sitting there camera. The other one was better. I thought this one would pivot, but it doesn't seem to pivot. So it's supposed to be multi-purpose, and apparently it's scripted, but over here it doesn't seem to be scripted to anything. I'm going to get rid of that camera. Let's try something else. Let's go into standard assets, and let's go into characters. If we did a first person or a third person we'd walk around somebody, and there's a prefab which is a third person. So if I drop that little character in, there he is. Yeah, there's a third person. And if I hit play, what happens? No camera is rendering. So he got no camera. So he needs a camera, and usually there's a rig that you put the camera on it, but let's see. Standard assets, go back to cameras and prefabs. Let's try the multi-purpose camera again, and let's see what that would look like if we check on the camera. We'd look over his shoulder. Alright, so he's sort of standing there. The camera doesn't move, but he does. So what I really have to do is attach the camera to him to follow him. Otherwise, this standard character ain't gonna be doing much. So what you do there, I guess, is you AutoCAM script target. The target should be the character, Ethan. There he is, Ethan body. And maybe with this set on Ethan, now when Ethan walks, yeah, the camera follows him. That's what we wanted to do. So now we're getting close to a game. as you can see, but poor Ethan has no color on his clothing. And he's a bit big relative to the carport. So there's a lot of stuff we're going to have to do. We're going to have to size everything according to Ethan. But he's not too bad, actually. How are you, Ethan? All right. So there's Ethan. Now, Ethan. Where are you, Ethan? Solar panel, third-person controller. So Ethan's body in standard assets and characters, third person in prefabs, we have Ethan. He doesn't have any textures. And usually that's because you have to download an Ethan texture. And Ethan's texture could take a while here. Funny they don't give you Ethan's texture. You'd think they would. There's also an AI third person. I'm not sure what he has. He has an Ethan body and an Ethan something else. What's the difference between them? Not much. Huh. Not sure why. But anyway, as you can see, Ethan is now attached. And he was attached to the character. He's not anymore. How's that? We go to oh, because I did it while it was playing. So yeah, what you have to do is go to the multi-purpose canvas rig. Anything you do while you're playing is a test, but it doesn't assign it. So once again, I need to go to target here, now that I'm not playing the game, and click on information and pick Ethan as the target. And now that Ethan is the target, when I hit play, the camera should follow Ethan, which it does, as he runs around that new terrain and plucks apples off of the apple tree. Now let's see if Ethan, the site can't be reached because I'm not online for some reason. Anyway, later on we will get a body for Ethan. With his shadow. And then Ethan says, well, heck, I'm going to go run over to the pavilion, which looks like it's buried underground, and I can hardly fit under the solar pavilion. So we have to come back out of here and go to the solar pavilion and wonder, like, what's wrong with our solar pavilion? Our solar pavilion. Well, for one thing, it's sunk under the ground. So maybe that's just better. Maybe it's okay the size it is. It just needed to be moved up. And now, let's try it. Let's see, Ethan, come over here. Yeah, it's a little better. It's not great, but there's the solar pavilion and Ethan's shadow. And then Ethan goes over to see the car. And the car is buried underground. And he says, how do I get my car out? Help, my car's underground. So once again, we've got to move over, find the Ford Escape, which is here, and hit F to get over to it and get it out of the mud. And it doesn't have a texture either, so it needs a texture for sure. And you'll see here, he's sitting on a big tree, and so we can't put the pavement on. So here's another case where you would go to terrain, and you would go to plant a tree, and you would come over here and go bing, after you've picked your tree. Oh, I put a whole bunch of trees in. Ain't that fancy, but they're all in the wrong place. But that might not be so bad. Maybe we can individually isolate. Can you individually isolate a tree that you've done with the terrain generator? And the answer is not necessarily. Yeah, so that's a disadvantage of using the terrain generator and not actually planting trees. So I'm going to undo that because undo place tree. Yeah, So that's a problem with that. So in this case, you probably want to go in individually and add trees, or try to do the individual tree. Make your brush size tree density, make it only 10, and get a small brush size, and hope that you can plant one tree. Oh, I think what it's doing though is it is adding them. It's just adding them at a really wide density. Is that possible? As opposed to a really high density where, yeah, look at that density there. Density of 99 is definitely putting a lot of trees on there. And here too, you've got boom. And it puts like a massive density of trees in there. Although that's not too bad when you use a tree density thingamajiggy like that. I could live with that for right now. It's faster. Putting trees on the property. Boom, put a tree there. Because then I can come in here and erase those other trees by painting in the terrain with the gravel or something of that nature. Because I'm not worried about covering things up here. Certainly can't cover up the car. So you can put some pavement in around there. And with that, and then come into the grass here, and just see I'll start covering up the teepee if I do that. So I'm covering up the picture a little bit. So when I go into play, there's old Ethan, and then Ethan goes racing through as Ethan goes to Rosebud, and all the trees that I just planted are there. He's casting his own shadow, and I can make him go under the shade of trees as he goes to his car. He gets on the pavement, and he says, "Oh, I wish I could get in my car." The car's a little bit big for him, but he's on the grass there, and we're actually seeing the shade of the trees, and then different kind of grass there. And then he walks down the driveway. So definitely using the terrain is a lot more fun. And we're getting to the point now where once we get all the textures for Ethan and the textures for the car, we really can create a photorealistic version of Rosebud. Even the tree is blowing in the wind. Look at that. Ain't that cool?
Right.
Seemed to be. It's not blowing in the wind, actually. And there's the windmill. And yeah, there's some cool effects going on here. Boom. The more textures we have, the more we'll be able to paint in on things like this as well. I'm not online, so I can't get the textures. But if I was online, then I would be able to get different textures and put them in. And you can see how detailed you can actually make a terrain once you've got everything going.